Hi, everyone. My name is Tracy McConnery, and I'm from Fleming College. And I have the pleasure today to introduce you to Dr. Leanne Johnny. Dr. Johnny is a professor in the field of English for academic purposes. She is a passionate and experienced professor who has worked at colleges and universities across Canada, consulted with the United Nations, and been involved in a number of educational projects in China, Japan, Sweden, Venezuela, and Tanzania. She completed her PhD in Culture and Values in Education at McGill University and is currently an English for academic purposes professor and interim occupation-specific language training coordinator in the Language Institute at Algonquin College. Thank you and welcome, Leanne.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Tracy. I'm just going to share my screen with you here. Okay. All right, so everybody can see this okay? My screen is on? Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for the opportunity to speak here today and to talk about listening and speaking in hybrid courses, strategies for learning and assessment. So as Tracy said, my name is Leanne Johnny, and I'm a professor in the field of English for academic purposes at Algonquin College. So I want to start today by sharing with you some really exciting news that I received recently. So I recently found out that we are going to be going back into the face-to-face classroom in the fall. And on the one hand, I am really, really excited for that because I think it'll be great to see my colleagues again and to have some of those conversations that we've really missed. It'll probably be nice to get out of my tracksuit more often as well. So I'm really looking forward to going back. But I'm also thinking a lot about what education is going to look like when we get back into the face-to-face classroom. So much has changed over the past 2 years. Education has changed, expectations have changed. And I guess what I'd like to propose here is that when we think about what education might look like in our post-pandemic environment, I'd like to propose a hybrid model, especially for our listening and speaking courses. So this is what I'm going to be focusing on today. So I'd like to start this presentation today by really making a case for using a hybrid model. So we're going to talk about post-pandemic learning and think about why would hybrid be the best model for us to use. Then we're going to look at some considerations for hybrid course design. So we'll look at what questions we need to ask before we plan it, and then what do we need to do? What are best practices for delivery? And then we're going to end with a few sample activities, and we'll think about some of the strengths and weaknesses with those activities. And if we have time at the end, I'd like to reserve just a little bit of time to go into breakout rooms so we can have a discussion about what maybe worked better for us online, because all of us, I'm assuming, are language teachers and we bring so much knowledge and experience to the table. So it would be really valuable to learn from each other as well. So before we start with our presentation today, I'm going to be using a tool called Mentimeter. So I don't know if any of you have used this before, but it's an online tool, kind of like Kahoot, where you can take polls and participate in the presentation. So we're going to start by doing a really simple Mentimeter right now, just to get everybody ready to use the technology. So if you have a phone, it would probably work best to use your phone for this, or you can use your computer. And you're going to go, I'm going to share my screen with you here. So we have something called menteecom. And I'm going to ask everybody to please go there. And I'm just going to share that with you. Okay, so you're going to go to mentee.com. And when you pull that up on your phone, you're going to enter a code. So the code for this one is 1204 4599. Okay, so 1204 4599. And the question is, will you be teaching face-to-face next term? So I'll just give everybody a minute to input their answers here. All right, so I see just as the results are coming in, Yes, it looks like some of us are going back to face-to-face. Maybe some of us are already teaching face-to-face right now. And it looks like a lot of us don't know, which seems to be kind of the way things go these days, right? We're kind of flying by the seat of our pants these days, trying to figure out what it is that we're doing. Okay, but it does look like, a lot of us will probably be going back, especially as we see numbers improving with the pandemic. And so I think it does raise questions about what is education going to look like. So this would be a good chance for us to consider this hybrid model. So I'm just going to come back to my PowerPoint presentation. So I would urge you to keep Menti open because we will be using it again throughout the presentation for a few other questions. Okay, so we're going to go to my next slide. So post-pandemic learning, why use a hybrid approach? So I want to start by sharing with you a picture. So this is a picture from my classroom. And this was March 2020, a week before the pandemic hit. And my classroom, it was such a wonderful place that day. Everybody had brought in food from different parts of the world. We were having a potluck and everybody was sharing their culture. We were getting to know each other. We had this really, really wonderful sense of community there. And I think that as language teachers, many of us do this, right? Because we're working in a multicultural environment and we do these things with our students on the one hand, because it's fun and people enjoy it. But on the other hand, we do this because it builds community in our classroom. And we know that when we have a really strong sense of community, people want to learn. It motivates them to learn and it helps people with the learning process. So a week later, many of us experienced classrooms that looked something like this. And this was right across the board. It doesn't matter what country you were in, if you were teaching high school, if you were teaching university, we all moved into Zoom and we had an experience where it was almost like the lights went out. So why is it that we went from these vibrant, robust learning communities to an environment where nobody was there? And in the research that's been done on this, it's interesting because some students didn't want to be online because they didn't want people to see their appearance. Some students didn't want people seeing into their homes. But a really big part of it was that students just thought that this was how you did online learning. And a part of the problem was that as professors, we didn't establish the norm that it's a community and cameras should be on. And you can't really blame us for that because for us, it was totally new as well. I know for myself personally, I kind of thought everybody's going to go on Zoom and everyone's turning their cameras on and it's just going to be my classroom online. Boy, was I wrong. So what were we doing at that time? So some of us like to look back on this initial period of the pandemic and we like to think, oh, we were doing online teaching and learning. But we weren't really doing the definition of what that is. What we were doing was called emergency remote teaching. And the hallmark of that is that it's totally unplanned. It's temporary, it's supported. For many of us, we just took our activities that we had planned for the face-to-face classroom and we moved them online and tried to deliver things synchronously. So I put this picture of a Toyota Corolla here because I think it kind of exemplifies the experience that many of us had. We had this curriculum and lesson plans, and they were Toyota Corollas. They were reliable, they were sturdy, they were good, and they were doing the job. And then we were told to take that Corolla and drive it on a racetrack. Could we do it? Absolutely. You can put the Corolla on a racetrack. Is it meant to be there? Absolutely not. And the quality of what we were trying to do, for many of us, did suffer. So if you look at research from that period, and you see the experiences that students had, many of them had very negative experiences with the move to online remote learning. So in a Canadian study that was done, they found that engagement and motivation decreased online. A lot of students felt that they couldn't complete their assignments because they didn't have support. Where was the professor? There was a perception of cheating that increased amongst students and amongst professors. Maybe some of us saw inflated grades. There were really stunted interpersonal relationships because students no longer had that sense of community. For many, it resulted in mental health problems. And we saw that there were a lot of socioeconomic gaps that increased, especially for learners who did not have access to technology. So I want to draw your attention for a minute. We're going to watch a really short news clip here. So this is a clip that was played on CTV News in Ottawa. And this aired, I think it was back in December. So students thought that they were going to be going back to the face-to-face classroom. And then Carleton decided that they were going to keep everything online. And this news segment interviewed some students about their thoughts with continuing with online learning. And the reason I want to watch this is because I think it really helps to humanize some of the experiences that students were having in the online environment. So I'm just going to share my sound with you here so that you'll be able to hear this. Here we go. All right.
Like so many of us, university students had been looking forward to changes this year, and some returned to normal life after months of online learning.
This week, though, students at Carleton University were told the school is shifting more classes online for the winter term, and many are asking if thousands of dollars spent on tuition is really worth it. Here's CTV's Tyler Fleming.
This isn't the experience that we signed up for and paid for.
Carleton University student Lydia Wilson knew the start of the year would be online.
And they sent out an email saying that the winter term would be more in person.
It's why she's here in first-year commerce and living in residence.
But when we checked our timetables, everything was online.
And Wilson isn't alone. Many other programs are closing the door on classrooms too.
I came here because of the really reputable aerospace engineering program.
Now Espen Swift questions if moving across the country was worth one in-person discussion group.
There's only a few kids in the class and it's very poorly done.
And some of the online lectures are pre-recorded content.
I just had one that was recorded last year and it was about 2 hours long.
But if there's lack of motivation to do it, I definitely feel like we're being cut short.
Plus, students want to know where's the professor.
And if you email them, it takes a couple hours to get back, and then you don't have any answers to what you're trying to do.
For international students like Yash Gandhi,
I chose Canada for a better education. I'm not getting that.
He pays $40,000 a year and gets one live tutorial.
I am a cash cow for the university, literally.
It's horribly unfair to these kids.
Parent Sarah Siss, whose daughter's psychology classes were moved online, says mental health is paramount and it's time for the province to step in.
Somebody has to mandate these professors and these administrations back into the classroom.
But colleges and universities can do what they want, and while Carleton says they plan to increase in-person programs for the winter months, many students here only know the courses that so far have not.
First year in criminology.
I'm in commerce.
My Bachelor of Science.
Aerospace engineering.
We have friends at Western, and they said that their midterms this term were in person.
So why not here? Which is why they're all here.
We're supposed to be a community, and it's supposed to set us up for so many things in life, and I'm not getting that.
Tyler Fleming, CTV News.
Okay, so I wanted to play that clip, as I said before, because I think it really helps to humanize some of the research that has been done on the experiences that students have had online. So I want to take a second to kind of reflect on your experience online and some of the challenges that maybe you have experienced in the online remote teaching world. So I'd like you to come back into Mentimeter. And I have another question for you here. And I'm going to pull that up and I will give you the code. And can everyone see my Mentimeter? Did it switch over to my Menti screen? Sometimes, yeah, okay, perfect. Because sometimes Zoom does not do that. Okay, so question number 2. The question is, what are some of the challenges that you have experienced with emergency remote teaching? So the code for this one is 4990 2970. So that's 4990-2970. So just reflect for a minute, maybe some of the problems I've identified, you've experienced yourself. Maybe you had different. Poor attendance. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll come up with some others here. Poor attendance, or even not knowing if students are there, right? Poor engagement, okay? Non-participation in breakout rooms. Oh yeah, oh, an ironing board is a home office, absolutely. Not knowing what I was doing, distracted learning, absolutely. Homework not done, technology problems. Oh yes, constantly troubleshooting. Technology is language teachers, right? Internet woes, absolutely. These are all problems that I think many of us have experienced, not only at the beginning of the pandemic, but that we continue to experience as we move on in the online world. So I guess there's something that we need to think about right now. And I'm just going to pull my PowerPoint back up here so we can kind of reflect upon this. So we know that online teaching is not necessarily always perfect. And I think we know that we've seen some issues for ourselves and for students. And now that we're coming out of this pandemic world, we have to ask ourselves, how do we move forward? And I think that we might have a knee-jerk reaction, some of us, and say, you know what, let's get back to business as it was before. We're going to go into the face-to-face classroom and we're going to pick up where we left off. And this is the mode to move forward. But I personally think that there are reasons to keep some degree of online learning in our classroom. And I'm going to present 3 reasons to you right now. So the first reason that I want you to consider is that there is a really big difference between emergency remote teaching and online teaching. So as I said before, many of us thought we were doing online teaching. Not really, because it wasn't well planned and we had just kind of moved everything from the regular classroom online. When you do online teaching and learning, it is planned. It is permanent. You have support and you're doing both synchronous and asynchronous activities together. Now, research has shown that when online teaching and learning is done well and when it's planned, the outcomes can be almost the same as having a regular face-to-face classroom. So if they're the same, well, then why do online teaching and learning? Well, I think the reason for this is because it affords our learners a lot of benefits. So first of all, we have flexibility. Learners want flexibility. And I think one of the things we're going to find going back into the regular classroom is that people almost demand it now. It's become an expectation. And it may become a point of competition between institutions as well as they try to recruit students into their programs. We can also accommodate different learning styles using our online teaching and learning. So I'm thinking about students being able to kind of move at their own pace through different activities, perhaps a listening activity that a student needs to do multiple times. And we also offer greater access to learning. I know personally, I've been teaching online for 2 years and I've seen a lot of moms bouncing babies on their knees as they were learning online. And on the one hand, sure, it can be distracting, but I also think how wonderful that they have the opportunity to be there. And perhaps if we were only face-to-face, that just wouldn't have happened. Probably some of you have seen a lot of international students in other countries as well who have been able to join your programs. Another point that I want to bring your attention to is just what students are looking for post-pandemic. So this was a survey that was done in the United States with almost 2,000 students, and it asked them what their preference would be for a post-pandemic modality of learning. And you can see that almost 70% said that they want to take some of their courses fully online, and another 70% said that they want to have a combination of in-person and online learning. So despite the experience that people did have, there seems to be a need or a want to continue with some degree of flexibility with online. Another point that I want to consider is that all of us as instructors have really grown, I think, over the past couple of years in terms of our facility with technology. So I know at the beginning of the pandemic, I thought, what is Zoom? How do I use this? How is this possibly going to work? But certainly as we move through the pandemic, I gained confidence. I did things that I never thought I would be doing on Zoom. And I think a lot of professors actually felt this way as they moved forward through the pandemic. And maybe we were able to move to something that looked a little bit like this as we moved through our courses. And we started to think about ways that we could establish a different culture online. So we're going to reflect for another second here. I want you to think about your own use of technology. So we'll come back to Menti for a minute. And we're actually going to, I'm going to give you a survey question. So this survey question was done with 700 professors. And I want to see how our results here compare to the actual survey that was done. So let me just share my screen with you one more time here. Okay, so our code for this Menti is 7358167. So that's 7358167. And the question is, how has your attitude towards technology use changed since the beginning of the pandemic? So more optimistic, no change, or more pessimistic? This is just a chance to think about your own technological skills. Well, this is really interesting to see. Okay, wow, so definitely a majority of people. I see more optimistic is growing here. So definitely people feel more capable and able to do some online learning, which again, I think provides a really strong rationale for continuing with this, because in many ways, the pandemic took all of us back to school and we're really ripe to be able to teach online. Okay, so I'm just going to come back to my PowerPoint presentation again. And we're going to consider one other benefit of online learning. Sorry, just dust them up. These are the joys of online learning when your PowerPoint shuts down on you here. Okay. Can you see my PowerPoint? Did it come back up for you? Yeah, okay, fantastic. Okay, so I want to draw your attention to this survey that was done with a number of instructors in the United States. And again, it was close to 1,000 instructors. And it seems that this group is even more optimistic than what we see here. But majority of instructors say that their attitudes have become more optimistic towards online learning. And again, the majority feel that they would like to have some degree of combination learning. So that would be in person and online. So another reason that I think that it's really valuable to continue with some degree of online learning is because there's some things, and probably some of you found this in your own courses as well, is that there's some things that we can just do better online. So I know that personally, one of the things I would do in my listening speaking classes is I would have students give presentations in small groups. So rather than having to get into a great big room full of people, they could practice their presenting in small breakout rooms. And the beauty with Zoom is that they can also record themselves. And then as a professor, I could go back and listen to them afterwards and give them that feedback. So there's certain constraints in the regular classroom and activities that we just can't do because of barriers with sound. Zoom offers us new potentials and new things that we can do with our students to make things really work. Okay, so as we think about our post-pandemic environment, I'm sure there's no kind of one-size-fits-all approach, and all of us have different variables and different students with different needs. But I think there is some degree of consensus that nothing could be worse than a return to normality. especially with all of the skills that we have developed in the past 2 years. So how do we move forward? So I would like to propose a hybrid model of education. And I think that the beauty of hybrid learning is that it combines the properties and possibilities of both face-to-face classrooms and online learning to go beyond the capabilities of each separately. So we know that in the face-to-face environment, we have community, we have motivation, and we have support. We can't necessarily emulate that online, the amount of motivation that we get from students being in the classroom. So we need that environment to really bring out the best in our students. But we also want to maintain some degree of flexibility for them, give them greater autonomy in their learning, and to promote greater learning opportunities. So when we bring these two models together, we're kind of taking the best of both worlds and creating an environment that can really optimize learning. So in the research that has been done on hybrid courses, and of course we need to keep in mind that hybrid courses have been around for a really long time. And there was a study that was done in 2009. It's an older study, but it's still considered to be one of the seminal studies. It looked at hundreds of courses in the United States that were done using a hybrid approach. And it found that hybrid can actually result in better results for students. So the point to keep in mind with all of this though, and I just like to point your attention as well to language courses, because research has been done as well with language learners. And in 2011, there was extensive research that was done on language learning and the benefits of hybrid. And what it did find is that language learners felt that hybrid improves their language outcome. They felt it better accommodates different learning styles. It provided them with more motivation, and many of the students said they thought it was better than face-to-face. So the point that we need to consider though, is that not all hybrid courses are necessarily created equally. And in order to make it work, we have to design something that is going to really facilitate learning. So we're going to turn now to hybrid course design, and we're going to look at some considerations for planning and delivery. So maybe I could just ask with a show of hands here, how many people here have taught a hybrid course or have been involved in designing hybrid courses? Is anyone? Okay, so I see there's a few. Okay, so we've got a few experts in the room here who can help us with this as we look at some different approaches to hybrid learning. Okay, so I want to start by just thinking about our definitions here. Okay, so we see at one end of the spectrum, we have face-to-face learning, which is obviously 100% in the regular classroom. Then we have online learning, obviously 100% online. Then we have blended and we have hybrid. Now you'll often hear people use these terms interchangeably, but they're actually different. There is a difference between them. So a blended course is where you have face-to-face interaction and then additional activities online. That's kind of like a follow-up to what's happening in the face-to-face classroom. In a hybrid model, online replaces some of your face-to-face time. And the online time might be synchronous or it might be asynchronous. So the hybrid model is not adding more to the class, it's replacing some of the face-to-face time and moving it into a different domain. Now, when it comes to hybrid courses, there's generally 3 types. So the first type is called the face-to-face driver. This one I think works really well for like a big, lecture class with hundreds of students. You do your lectures in person, then you have some follow-up activities that are happening online. The other one is called flex, and this would be your first few weeks are face-to-face, followed by online work. And the third one is the online driver. So this would be where maybe your lectures are more online and then you have activities that are taking place in class. So maybe I can just get you to put in the chat box right now. I would be really interested to know what kind of hybrid course do you think could work well for language learners? what would you foresee working? Or for your own language learners? I mean, everybody probably teaches in different contexts. Which one do you think would work best? And I'll just watch the chat box here. If you want to put it in there, we can get some ideas. Okay, online driver, face-to-face driver, online driver. Okay, so like I said, of course, all of us have different needs and different variables we're working with, but it is really interesting that so many of you chose the online driver, because this is often what the recommendation is when we're looking at hybrid courses for language learning. So one of the recommendations is when you're doing online with language, you're going to use your online time for a lot of your input. So this is going to be for listening and speaking class, for example. You might have students listening to pieces online. The beauty with online, of course, is that if they do it asynchronously, they can be listening to it multiple times if they need to. And then you can also have comprehension questions for students online, which allows you as a professor to assess the extent to which each student understood the material. It's a lot different than being in a regular classroom where you might ask a question and one or two students are able to answer. When you put the input online, it gives you a better sense of students' comprehension of all of your students. You also want to make sure that you have collaboration online. So again, we have to remember with hybrid, it's not necessarily all asynchronous, and especially with language learners, we want to have opportunities where they can produce language. Now, when we meet face-to-face, this is where most of the output could be taking place. And so by this, I mean, you want to have a lot of your speaking activities taking place in the classroom. And one of the reasons for this is that when we communicate online, it's okay, right? We know it's okay and that it works. But communicating on Zoom can sometimes be very stilted. We get pauses, people can't all speak at the same time. There's limitations to communicating with technology. And also, because a lot of students do turn their cameras off, they miss body language, which is a huge part of communication. So to the extent that we can move some of the input online and then bring our face-to-face environment to give opportunities for speaking, it seems to work better. And of course, in the face-to-face environment, you want to use those opportunities to build community, which is one of the things that really lacks with online classes, is that students feel they don't have that community. Okay, so we're going to look at planning a hybrid course. So I have 5 questions that have been recommended in the literature, questions that you might want to ask when you were putting a course together. So we're going to come back to Mentimeter. I'm going to ask you to open that one more time. And I want you to look at the steps and I want you to put them in order. So how would you put these different steps in order? So we're going to go back and I will give you the code for our Mentimeter. Okay, so this is question number 4. Okay, so the code is 8288-1298. So 8288-1298. Okay, so we've got a number of steps. So I'd like you to try and put these steps in order. How would you do it? Just going to make sure that my screen is shared with you here. And I'll give everyone a minute to work on this. Okay, excellent, excellent. Okay, I feel like this is the time on Zoom where we could kind of benefit from some elevator music in the background, right? Where people are silently working. So I'll just give you one more minute. Okay. Interesting. So review course to decide what works best, online and face-to-face. Determine how students will demonstrate learning. Okay. All right, so I'm going to pull my PowerPoint presentation up here, and I'm going to share with you the recommendations that have been made in the literature. Oh, and I see as more people participate, we actually have the answers in the same way as the recommendations. So let me just pull this up. You can see my PowerPoint again, I'm assuming. Yes. Okay. All right. So first, yes. Oh, you can't see it. Okay. Sorry. Let me put this up for you again. Okay. All right. So the recommendation for designing a course is yes, you want to start with what are the course requirements, and then secondly, how will students demonstrate learning? So it's the same way that you would design any course that you're looking at. You want to think about how do I build in activities that will help students to show what it is we want them to learn. The third question you might want to ask is what works best online and what works best face-to-face. Because again, we're not doing hybrid just for the point of doing hybrid. When we're building courses, we want to think about how do we utilize the strengths of both of these different environments so that students have an optimal learning experience. The fourth point, and this is really, really important, is that you want to think about how you will integrate online learning and in-class learning. So in the research that has been done on hybrid courses, students have found that the courses they prefer are the ones that integrate what's happening online with the face-to-face classroom. So these shouldn't be seen as two separate modalities. What you do online, you bring into the regular classroom face-to-face, and then there might be some type of post activity that the students work with as well. But you do want to have that flow between the different spaces. And then the last point to consider is how are you going to split the class? And again, there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. One of the things you might consider is how much flexibility your students need. So I know for me personally, I work with a lot of students who are new Canadians. They're parents to young children, they have jobs that they're juggling. And I know that my students have told me that they really appreciate having a lot of flexibility. And when I've asked them about their preferences for in-person learning, they actually don't want to come into the college too often because it's really difficult for them to get there. Some of the international students that I work with prefer to come in face-to-face because they don't necessarily have the same responsibilities and they're looking to build community, they're looking to make friends. So I think that when we're planning a hybrid course, we also have to think about the needs of our students because we want things to be learner-centered as well. Okay, all right, so some advanced or some language specific considerations. Advanced learners have a more positive experience with hybrid courses. Okay, if you're doing it with lower level students, I would minimize the amount of online time you have because it can lead to a lot of frustration. It doesn't mean that you can't have it, but it has to be really clear what you're doing and probably not as much autonomous work. We all know, and I mean, this just comes from language learning in general, that language learners prefer authentic learning materials. In the research that has been done on hybrid courses, professors who take textbook materials and put them online and have students do textbook materials online, it doesn't go over well with students. Yet, if you bring in authentic materials that students can look at and listen to, it tends to work really, really well with students. And the other point I would say is that language learners benefit from authentic interactions. We know this. And online, we have so many opportunities to do this. So for example, in my own listening and speaking courses, one of the assignments I had students do was to attend a virtual workshop at the college, okay, and then report on that workshop. So it doesn't necessarily have to be pre-recorded things that we're doing on Zoom. Because so many things have moved virtual, we have so much opportunity to give students more authentic learning experiences online. Okay, so now we're going to imagine that we have put our course together. We have our split. We know online how much synchronous and asynchronous time we're going to have. Now we need to think about some best practices for delivery. So I want you to open the chat box, and I know that some of you have done these courses before. So I'd like you to, just in the chat box, maybe you could put in some of your best practices, maybe things to look out for, things that you definitely have to do. If you've never taught a hybrid course before, maybe some of the things that you anticipate would help you with best practices. So let's take a minute here to look at this. Okay, assessment delivered in the face-to-face section. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that could help to address some of the perceived cheating that a lot of professors have seen. Stories that relate to family, communicate with students exactly what the plans are. Absolutely. Knowing the student's computer setup, possibilities, limitations. Absolutely. So the technology. Cameras should be on when possible, creates a much better online learning experience. And it says best practice here, use online asynchronous to pre-teach or engage the students cognitively, reflectively, motivate and engage in synchronous sessions. Okay, fantastic. These are all great recommendations. So I'm going to share some of the ones that have come from the literature. And these are kind of just the top things to keep in mind when you're delivering a class. And I see immediate feedback. That's one of the ones I'm going to discuss. Okay, so the first thing is teach students the technology. The biggest frustration with a lot of students is that they don't know how to use the learning management system. If you are to have a successful course, you have to teach the technology, and you cannot assume that students know how to use it. So that's point number one, probably the most important. The second thing is that you need to establish your expectations immediately. And this is often a really detailed syllabus that you read through with the students. How much time are they going to be online? How much time do they have to put into the course when they're doing their asynchronous sessions? When are you going to meet? So all of these things need to be really clear to learners at the beginning of the course. The third point, and that was just brought up as well in the chat box, is to maintain frequent contact and to give students a lot of feedback, because again, disappointment with online courses often relates to a lack of professor presence in the classroom, both online and regular classroom. Be consistent with meeting times. So you can't change things around. It's really hard with online courses because then people won't know what's going on, right? So if you're going to meet, it's got to be at the same time always. Create a sense of community. So we know that we're going to use the face-to-face environment to build that community, but even online, having students post a picture, write a biography, put a link to your favorite song. It gives a chance to make the online environment feel a little more like a community as well. And the last point is ask for feedback in your course, for you personally and for your course, and see if you need to adapt things, because we do need to adapt, of course, as we go to improve, always, whether we're face-to-face or whether we are learning online. Okay, so there's three caveats that I want to share with you for online learning. If you're going to do this, I would just tell you to keep in mind that it takes time to plan a hybrid course. This isn't something that you just, put online really, really quickly. It needs to be designed. You need to think about how to integrate activities. So you want to take the time that you need to plan it. It might be difficult to find a suitable textbook. You need to have an LMS. Hybrid is not going to work well without having some type of learning management system, and you need to have that detailed syllabus. Another point to keep in mind is that hybrid courses are not very nimble. Because they take so much planning, And because they are so integrative, it's hard to change things on the fly. And the last point I just want to reiterate, which I've already said, is that tech problems will definitely lead students to dissatisfaction. So it's really important to make sure that students understand the LMS that you're learning. Okay. All right, so we're going to look at a few samples. Okay, we're going to look at a few sample activities. And how are we doing for time here? Okay, so I want to get your feedback. So I'm going to give a few sample activities. Those of you who are experts with hybrid, you can maybe give us your feedback on what you think about these. Those of you who are new to this, you can just think about what are some of the potential strengths, some of the strengths that you see based on what we've learned, and potentially what are some of the pitfalls. Okay, so let's think about strengths and pitfalls. So we're going to start with our first one here. Okay, so our first example is it's a listening activity. So online, we're going to have students listen to a TED Talk. Okay, we're going to do some type of a comprehension test in our learning management system so that we can see what do they know, what did they understand from the TED Talk. And we'll take some vocabulary from the talk and we'll have them do like a vocabulary match so they can build some vocabulary. When we meet with them in person, we're going to have some group discussion. So we might give like some reflection questions that students can ask. Maybe we'll do some type of a gallery walk. So I don't know if you've ever done these in your classes before where you put people in groups, everybody has chart paper, you might give them a question, they write some things down, some ideas around, and then people walk around the classroom almost like an art gallery and look at each other's ideas. And we're going to do something social. We'll have a nice break where we bring students together, people get to know one another. For follow-up, we're going to give students a discussion question online, something related to the discussion that we had in class. And maybe we'll give them some pronunciation work if we notice that there were difficult words that came up, and maybe some type of a post test to see what they learned. Okay, so this is activity number 1. What do you guys think? Strengths, pitfalls. Would this work? That's the first question. Is this going to work? What do you think? Any strengths? If you don't want to talk, if you don't feel comfortable talking on Zoom, you can always put it in the chat box. How do you do pronunciation online? That's a good question. Maybe we have students try to record themselves doing certain words and we give feedback. Maybe we record certain words so that they hear how they are pronounced from the vocabulary, possibly. I'm sure other people have ideas about how to do that. Maybe we meet in a synchronous format online to do some type of work. Because remember, our online time doesn't necessarily have to be asynchronous, right? And that's the beauty of hybrid. Any other ideas about what works here? Would it be better to do the post test in person? What do you guys think? Post testing in person? Any ideas? I think it depends on whether it's a summative or a formative type assessment, right? So if you're just doing it for learners to kind of reflect upon what they've learned, I don't know if it necessarily has to be in person, but certainly if we're doing some type of a summative assessment, I agree, in person, definitely. The problem with a TED Talk online is the learner can enable closed captioning, so it might not be real test of listening skills. Interesting point. The problem, I think, and it's really interesting, is that it's not just a TED Talk though, right? I know I went into a breakout room the other day. I had my students listening to something, and when I went into the breakout room, Google Translate was on, capturing the dialogue and translating it as it was speaking. This was a YouTube video. And I thought, wow, I've learned something new. So there is always that potential, right? When something is online, of course, there's going to be people who use that. In some ways, it might be a strategy to help with understanding, right? Like it can be used sometimes if people can see the words. So not always necessarily negative. Any other ideas you guys want to share? And then I'll share some of my thoughts on this. Okay, so one of my thoughts about this is that I think it's good because it uses integration. Okay, we're integrating the online with what we're doing in the classroom. And I think we're giving students variety. Okay, so they're doing some listening, they're doing some speaking, they're collaborating. Our topic is covered in both mediums, but there is a huge pitfall that arises here. And I'm sure all of us have experienced this as teachers. We ask students to listen to something and they don't do it. And then they come to class and the activity flops because nobody is prepared to do the activities because they didn't do the listening. So in these scenarios, this is what is recommended. It can help to give students a schedule so that they know when they're supposed to do their listening. But the most powerful thing is to assign marks. So if you assign marks, and it only has to be 1%, you have a 1% comprehension activity afterwards, students will do it. So, and you do need to build that into your course. Otherwise, you do get into these scenarios where the integration just simply won't work. So that's one thing I would keep in mind. Okay, example number 2. This is a debate. Okay, we've got a debate. So we're going to start with some listening and collaboration online. So students are going to watch a short news video. It's going to be like some type of video clip about the controversial topic that they are debating. And then we're going to have them meet in groups independently. They meet with their group members and they're going to do some prep to get ready for the debate. They're going to come into class and we're going to have an in-class debate. So we're going to have lots of collaboration, speaking back and forth. And then we're going to afterwards have reflection online where we give students a discussion question and they're actually going to record their responses for us. Okay, and it might be something that came out of the debate, something controversial that they're going to think about and answer using persuasive language. Maybe we could add that in there as well. Okay, strengths. What are some of the strengths of this? Any ideas? And if you want, if people are feeling shy, you can always put it in the chat box if you want. So potential strengths or potential pitfalls as well, things that we think might not work. Okay, so I see their recorded responses are a terrific reflection tool. I agree. I really like recorded responses. I like that we have collaboration in this, absolutely. One of the nice things about recorded responses is that we can go back and listen, right? As instructors, then we can really like target the feedback to our students. And often I will give the students spoken oral feedback so that they listen and I can help them with pronunciation. Pitfall, if some members don't do the prep, the entire thing falls apart. Absolutely. So we could have situations where maybe students don't meet. The integration is a strength. I agree. Okay, so getting students to do stuff together so that they're preparing for in class. Okay, so I'm going to share with you. So I think these are all definitely strengths, but I will share a pitfall that I see. Sorry, I'm just going to come here. So we gave them one video clip to listen to, assuming that everybody's going to understand that clip. And I think that it's really important when students are working autonomously, when they're independent, that we give some choice. And we might want to think about things that are shorter, things that are longer, so that students can work with their own language abilities. The problem is that if we put something up there that's really difficult to understand, students might not be able to do that autonomous work on their own. So we do have to think about the types of materials and perhaps offer a few different choices for things that students can work with so that it makes the autonomous part run a little more smoothly. Okay. Okay, so I know we're running kind of late on time here. It is almost 11:15. So I'm going to ask our moderator, do we have time to go into a breakout room for a few minutes, or are we almost out of time here?
I'm going to defer to Yvonne for that. Yvonne, what are your thoughts?
Sure, there's our next session starts at 12. So sure, I think why don't you go ahead and do that, Leanne?
Yeah,
okay.
That would be great.
Okay, so let's just take a little bit of time. I really think it would be nice. I don't know if you all know each other or if you're new to each other, but let's do some community building here. So we're going to go into a discussion room, and I want to give you a chance to meet some of the people on Zoom, to introduce yourselves to each other, and then you can pick one of these questions to discuss. We don't have a lot of time, but as a group, you can pick one of these, and I'm going to put these in the chat box for you. So question number 1 is there anything you did online in your listening and speaking classes that worked better than in the regular classroom? Okay, so think back to your experiences. Is there anything that worked better? Number 2, what elements of your listening and speaking course could benefit from being online in the future? And number 3, what have you learned in terms of best practices for online teaching? Okay, so you might only have time to discuss one of these. If you get through all of them, fantastic. Maybe we'll just take 10 minutes, okay, to go into a breakout room. So I am going to put these questions into the chat box. So I would ask that, that you please, oh, this is interesting. I'm actually not able to put it in there. Okay, I'm going to just copy and paste them into. See, we need to be able to adapt to the technology, right? This is the joys of teaching online. So I'm just going to copy and paste this right into the chat box for you. Okay, so if you're able to maybe take a screenshot of that or copy and paste it onto your own computer, that would be great. And I'll put it into just some small rooms where we can. I see the rooms are already set up. Okay, so go ahead.
Meeting is being recorded.
Okay, I think everyone is back now. All right, so I know we didn't have a lot of time to discuss, but I did go into your breakout rooms and I heard about some really awesome tools and activities that people are doing online. I heard some groups talking about like problems with assessment and how do we move forward with that. And I think there's so many unknowns right now as we plan for the future. And I know all of us are going to be experimenting in the next year, I'm sure, with hybrid, with online, with all of these different technology resources that we have now. So I thought maybe we could end our session here with one last Menti meter. And the question here is, what language activities worked better online? So for this one, if you have like a tool that you wanted to put up there as well, I know some people were talking about Flipgrid and having students record themselves, and people were talking about Edpuzzle or different things. So maybe you have an activity or a suggestion that worked well. So if you want to go ahead, and we'll just end with some ideas for our future classes. So the code here is 4241932. So that's 4241932. Okay, so I see some ideas coming up here. Creating choose your own adventures with Google Forms. That sounds really amazing. I like the choose your own adventure part of it, right? Everyone enjoys that. Pre-listenings, absolutely, to help students when they get into the classroom. Presentations, that was one that came up in a lot of the groups, that people were talking about the value of doing presentations online. Reading activities, reflections, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, there's so much, and I'm sure everybody has experiences and ideas of things that they did. I guess the point to really keep in mind is as we move forward, if you do use the hybrid activity, don't overload your students. Remember that the hybrid model is supposed to replace some of the face-to-face instruction, not create more instruction for them, because you don't want it necessarily to become a source of stress. And I think that we've got such a, we're kind of at this crossroads now. We've got so many ideas, so many directions that we can go in. I want to wish all of you really well with your planning for hybrid. And I hope some of the ideas that we've shared here today you'll find useful as we move back into face-to-face. So thank you so much for having me today. It's been a real pleasure to be here.
Leanne, I just want to thank you so much. I know I learned a lot personally, and I know our team did, and I think we'll be reaching out to you again. We have so many students who definitely don't want to return to the full-time in-person model. So they're definitely looking for that flexibility that you spoke of. And they just have so many different things on their plate. And it's, as you said, how we can be student-centered and meet their needs, but also our learning outcomes. So thank you very, very much. We really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for having me, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.